Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, episode 24.
If we run out of stockpiled grass in the wintertime, we're going to sell some cows.
You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers. I'm Cal Hardage, your host of the Grazing Grass Podcast. And on today's episode, we have Austin Troyer of Crossroads Land and Livestock. Austin and his wife are first-generation farmers. Austin started out by working on a ranch, and he worked there for a number of years till he was able to find his own land to lease and start his own ranch. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Let's talk to Austin. Austin, we want to welcome you to the Grazing Grass Podcast. We're excited you're here.
Thank you, Cal. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm excited as well.
Wonderful. Can you tell us about yourself and your operation?
Sure. My name is Austin Troyer. I'm 28 years old. I'm married to a beautiful wife named Maggie, and I have an 18-month-old son, Harrison. And we are first-generation farmers or ranchers in East Central Ohio. I guess my journey to get started here, I graduated high school and thought about going to college, and just wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, and didn't have the money necessarily to go to college, and didn't really like the idea of a bunch of student loans, and just wasn't quite sure about it. So I decided, instead of going to school, just to take a job on a farm in Southern Ohio, and ended up being a really neat operation. It's called Ohio Land and Cattle. They have an awesome website, and they're still a really cool ranch, a really neat operation, and they taught me a lot. I worked for them for a couple years, and an opportunity came up to another ranch in that area. And that ranch is one of the largest ranches in Ohio. It's a really neat operation. They're running over 2,000 cows. Worked for them for the last 8 years before I went on my own. And it was a really neat opportunity. It was a really cool environment to learn in. Those people taught me basically everything I know about the cattle industry, livestock production, animal health. I owe it all to those two ranches. And they were kind of instrumental in, I guess, me developing our ranch here. And I was honest with those folks. I told them from the beginning, my dream is to go on my own, and I want to try to find a lease. And they were like, great, let us help you do it. So I was working for them for a total of 10 years between the two ranches. And I spent the last 5 years while I was there really, really looking for a lease. I enjoyed what I did, but I just always dreamed of being on my own and being my own boss.
Oh, yes. Now, jumping back to your ranch, when you started on that first ranch, did you have any experience with livestock at that point?
I didn't know the difference between a cow and a heifer.
Oh, yes?
I didn't know anything. No, it was an eye-opening experience, and all I knew is that I did not like construction work, which is all I had ever done. And the cows were a lot more fun. So I learned a ton the first year. I'll put it that way.
I imagine so. It's funny how that you had done construction work, so you knew you didn't want to do that. Growing up, I grew up on a farm, and for some reason, I thought that's what I wanted to do. My brother thought, no more ever.
Yeah, that's funny.
So you go to that ranch, you don't know much about livestock at that point. Were they doing any regenerative practices, or were they more of a traditional ranch?
They were doing the best they could. It's a really neat area. It's all strip mine country, and there's some really big limitations when it comes to, if you want to call it mob grazing or intensive grazing, mostly with just the topography of the land. There's some really rough country, and then water. Water was, it limited everything. You'd have a 600-acre field with, a little spring in a corner. And so it was really hard to get animal impact on the far sides of those fields. Yes. So they did really well, I thought. They kept all their cows in one group and rotated as best they could. I don't know that I would call it intensive grazing. It was more of a traditional rotational grazing, moving cows maybe every 2 weeks in bigger fields. But it was pretty good compared to most, and with the limiting factors, I was impressed with it. I thought it was really neat.
Oh, yes. So you worked there a couple of years, then you moved to the other ranch. How was it set up?
Yeah, they were actually business partners, and they bought a ranch together, and I ended up taking care of it. So I didn't.
Yes.
It was kind of a transition.
Okay, yes.
And they presented me with a really neat opportunity. They let me run cattle in with theirs as my pay.
Oh, yes.
So I didn't take a salary. I was able to run 100 cows, so I had to buy and pay for them, but I could bring them there, I could run them there, and they paid all my bills. But I didn't take a salary, so that was the hard part, was trying to make a living with one paycheck a year, basically.
Yes, that would be, but that's a pretty big opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so hard to get started today without an opportunity like that. So I'm really thankful for those people that were put in my life, and they really gave me a start in this business. So I owe them a lot. Yeah.
Yes, that's a really good circumstance. I don't know if other ranches do that or not. I'm not familiar enough with it, but yeah, that was great. So you started looking for leased land a number of years ago, and how'd that search go?
It was extremely frustrating in the beginning. There's these places I would go look at and find, and it was all strip mine country, and there would be a couple thousand acres strung together that was just sitting empty. And I would contact the coal company, and I'd call people, and I would email. I drove to their office one time, and nobody would return your call. They were such a big company, they didn't want to mess with me. I couldn't pay them enough to be on it, and they didn't want to mess with the liability, and they didn't even want to listen to me. So it was very frustrating. It took 5 years till I finally found the right place. It was about an hour from where I was working at the time, and I called the landowners probably 4 or 5 times without any response, and then just randomly, about a month after my last phone call, they called me back. I don't really know why. Maybe it was meant to be. And since then, it's been great. They've been an awesome company to work with. They love what we're doing. We're kind of taking care of their ground. They have a lot of problems with trespassing with other, especially during deer season. A lot of guys come in and hunt their property without them knowing it. And they own so much land, it's hard to police it for them. So having me there with the fence up now and keeping an eye on the place, that's been a big value to them, probably even more so than what I'm able to pay them in rent. So it's been a really good relationship ever since then. So
very good. How many acres do you have leased there?
This year we added a couple pieces, and we're up to 4,200 acres.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it sounds like a lot. But for Ohio anyway, it sounds like a lot. But it's some pretty rough stuff. It's pretty poor. There's really limited soil. It's all been basically flipped upside down when they mined it and put back.
And when did they mine it?
The last piece that they finished mining was finished last year in 2020. The reclamation was started. But then other pieces were mined in the 80s. So some of it's old and some of it's new.
Yeah. We have a fair amount of coal mining around here, which some of the land was mined probably in the 70s, and it's just awful. I mean, there's a pile of rocks out there. And then, I don't know, 80s or 90s, the reclamation of the land after they dug it was much better. And that land is at least put back and looks like it's usable, even if they didn't get the topsoil exactly where it should be. However, the newer land they're doing, that's just finished recently, it's in pretty good shape outside of them making a big hill there.
Yeah, I have the exact same experience here. We have some farms that still have the old high walls that run through them.
Yes.
Still have piles of shale and piles of the coal that they left, and it's really poor. But then we also have
yes.
stuff that they finished last year. You're right. They did a fairly good job. And I think
Yes.
the regulations are a little more strict now. They can't leave those high walls and stuff like that. And they have to grow so many tons of grass or tons of forage nowadays. Right. So, yeah, it's getting better. It's getting better for sure.
So after all your searching, you get this land lease. What's your process to get started there?
Again, this is where the ranches I worked on came into play. They were great people. They just said, hey, you found this ground. Here's a tractor with a post driver and a front end loader. You could rent it from us. I basically had it for a month, and I went around. I bought 4 semi-loads of fence posts, wooden posts, and just went and put all my posts in. And it's been that way. I've borrowed a bulldozer, I've borrowed an excavator, I've borrowed skid loaders, trucks and trailers, everything. And I just pay them a fair rent for it. So that's been it's been absolutely crucial for me and been really, really nice. Just to give you an idea of how much fence we've built, over the last 2.5 years, my wife and I have built 72 miles of fence. So I've used a lot of their equipment.
And you're still together.
Believe it or not, we are.
That's a lot of fence, yes.
Yeah, and I should also mention she was pregnant for a bunch of that. So she's a trooper. She's awesome. I couldn't do this without her.
And just to give her a shout out, she did help you get this all set up so we could hear you on the podcast.
Absolutely. You would be listening to nothing without her.
So what kind of fence did you put up?
We've built so much. I say 72 miles, but that includes a lot of 1-strand, 2-strand electric.
Oh, okay. Some of your interior fences as well.
Yeah, and even all of our exteriors are just 2 strands. We built so much. We're in a pretty remote area. If I do have cows out or sheep out, it's not like they're running down a highway. We're pretty isolated here, and a lot of our perimeter fences just border other chunks of woods or neighbors' farms, and it's not a huge deal. So we have a pretty limited fence, but we almost have to just to make it cost effective. There's no way we could afford to build a woven wire or something like that.
Right, yeah, the cost would be astronomical. So you did 2-strand high tensile wire?
That's what we started with.
For your perimeter?
Yes, and that was originally for our cows. And then once we got into the sheep business, we were worried about the sheep getting out of that. And really, it hasn't been an issue. We've kept it 2 strands. We've added some 3 strands when we were training them to electric, but we've kept them in all winter with 2 strands, and actually quite a bit of 1-strand perimeter fence as well on some steep areas where it's hard to get to, and there's just woods above them. They just don't pressure it. So we kind of take the approach, we're going to put them in there, and if they get out, we'll improve the fence. So we're kind of flirting with danger a little bit there, but we can get away with it where we're at.
Well, I'll be perfectly honest. Our perimeter fence, most of it's 5-wire bob wire, and we have a little bit of field wire. I was very fearful when we got the sheep that a bob wire fence wouldn't hold them, and I only ran them where I had field wire, and it just wasn't enough ground, and it's too expensive to go put more in. So I started grazing them on the other pastures I have. And amazingly, they don't go out my perimeter fence. Now, I haven't got my sheep trained to electric fence, and I need to do that. And they will go through some of my interior fences, which doesn't really bother me. But I'm just amazed that they don't leave the perimeter fence. But they've been really good about that.
Yeah, and that's we deal with a lot of that as well. There's every now and then where we do have a couple sheep that will get out of our perimeter fence, but they're such flock animals that they just come right back.
Oh yes.
So it's hard to justify putting a ton of capital into a heavier fence when it's really not hurting anything.
Right. Yes. No, I completely agree with that. So you got this lease and you started putting up fences.
Yeah, we got the lease. We got it all fenced. We fenced it in, kind of as we went. I fenced a couple hundred acres and brought our cows up here. And then that winter, it was just a matter of getting fence built in front of the cows. I think we brought 250 cows. So they were eating quite a bit of grass, but luckily the lease was empty before we got it. So it was basically stockpiled grass.
Oh, yes.
It was a little mature. It was a little rank. But the cows still did fine on it. It was just, they weren't due to calve until May. So they were pretty, they were early bred. So their maintenance requirements weren't super high at the time. So they did really well on it. And yeah, we just kept building fence and kept moving cows until we ran out, and then we'd build some more fence.
Oh, yes.
We're finally at the point now where we have all of our perimeter fences up, and we're kind of going back now and dividing it up and really improving our grazing and our management as we get the cash to do it, and I guess the time. It's been kind of crazy the last couple of years. We finally have a farm manager we just hired about a month ago, so that's made a huge difference already to have some help. So that's working really, really well.
Oh, yes.
We kind of call ourselves a low input operation. We don't have any equipment. The only thing we have is 2 4-wheelers and a pickup truck.
Oh, yes.
I don't have a tractor. I don't feed any hay. If we run out of stockpiled grass in the wintertime, we're going to sell some cows.
Oh, I imagine so.
And it might not be the best situation for everybody, but it's just what's worked for us. I really hate to invest a bunch of money into equipment that's going to depreciate. So we've just tried to keep our money into working capital with the cows. And as we grow and over time, there might be a place for a tractor, and we could probably run a couple more cows if we were willing to have some hay, but just trying to haul hay and feed hay and all that stuff, logistically for us, it's just not economically possible right now. I shouldn't say it's economically possible. It's not economically beneficial for us. So we just basically take what we have here and try to get the cows through the wintertime on it and adjust our stocking rate accordingly to it. And like I said, with 4,200 acres, we're able to do that fairly well. Our farm's split up a little bit, but for the most part, we can move cows from farm to farm just by walking them down the roads. There's one farm that's a little bit further that we'll haul cows to. It works well. We're blessed with a bunch of fescue in this area that we can winter cows on. It stays green really well for us, and that's kind of our biggest obstacle is just winter feed without a tractor. And so adjusting our stocking rate has been the biggest thing for us so far.
You bring up a really important point there. I see a lot of beginning farmers buy a few cows and they immediately decide they need a tractor. And that's a lot of money tied up into something that's going to depreciate and something that's not producing any income for you. Now, that's not saying my business model is the right one for everyone. Everyone's got their own circumstances, but that's something I see quite often.
Yeah, it is. And that's what was challenging to me was everybody in this area has, woven wire fences and a brand new tractor, and they feed hay or they feed corn silage. And coming from that point of view where it's pretty different. And I think that learning from those 2 ranches that I worked on that you can take cows through winter without any hay. Like I didn't know you could do that. Just understanding that you don't have to be a high input producer has really made a huge difference for us.
Oh, yes. Now, you mentioned your fescue there. What other grasses are you grazing?
The main grasses, fescue, I love and I hate fescue. I hate it in the summertime. It's so hard to keep it from going to seed.
Yes, it is.
Cattle don't finish well on it at all. It gives in my opinion, it gives the meat off flavor. But we have a lot of orchard grass. We have a lot of brome, a lot of timothy are our main grasses. And then legumes, we have clover. We have a lot of sweet clover, crown vetch and hairy vetch. And then whenever they reclaim the mines, they typically plant alfalfa.
Oh, okay.
And that lasts a couple years, but it kind of fades out. It's not super native to this area, especially to the strip mine once they're done. So they plant it and it does well for a couple years, but it just seems to go away. And the more native legumes come back a lot quicker, like the clover and especially the crown vetch. That's probably our dominant legume.
On the reclaimed land around here, they're not doing any alfalfa in our area, but in addition to the other species you mentioned, we get a lot of Cerisa lespedeza put out on the reclaimed land.
Really? Okay. We have it. It's showing up as an invasive species here. Our sheep are loving it, but our cows don't seem to touch it very much.
Yes.
It's part of the reason between Cerisa lesbidiza and the autumn olive. That's the reason we got our sheep. So, we're fighting those two pretty hard here.
We have a fair amount of Cerisa on our place. You're right. Once it gets any kind of size, it gets too woody and the cows don't want to eat it. But it's got some really good qualities for sheep. They just don't produce as many parasite eggs when they're grazing. Cerisa depresses it.
Yeah. And our sheep they're out there. Last week I was out there watching them, and there's just a little bit in the field that they were in, and it's just a brown, dry stem right now, and they were still eating it.
Oh, yes.
So there's definitely some benefits there.
Now, before we jump to your sheep and find out when you added those to your operation, what did you do for watering?
We're just letting them water out of the ponds and the streams right now, which isn't necessarily the best practice. It's what we got, and we're working on it as we go. We're actually drawing a water system right now. Actually, it's 4 different water systems put together. It's over 60,000 feet of pipe, and we're working on a proposal with our landowners to take it to them and just see if this is something that they're willing to help us install. It's hard to justify putting that kind of infrastructure into somebody else's property. So our landowners have been great to work with. They love what we're doing. So I'm going to approach them with a little bit of a proposal, maybe even have them or ask them to forgive part of our lease or something like that in exchange for us putting this infrastructure into their property.
Oh, yes.
Because that's really the limiting factor in everything here is just it's hard to really get animal impact when you don't have water. So that's what's preventing us in controlling our rotations or how fast they are, our the size of our paddock. Everything here is related back to water.
Oh, yes. How often are you moving your cattle?
Right now, it's about once a week on average.
Oh, yes.
We basically start with a grazing chart and just decide our recovery periods. And then we have maps that we have all our fields numbered, and we just go through and create a 60-day rotate or whatever our recovery is. If it's in the springtime, it'll maybe 30 or 45 days. And then, in the summer, it goes to 60, then to 90. And if we get really dry, it'll go to 120. And we just plan out our grazing according to that and use the fields that we have and what we've got now. And so it ends up being about once a week, probably on average, during the growing season. And then in the wintertime, it changes. In the past, we've just been able to take our stockpile kind of in one pass, which I don't think is the most efficient way to harvest it. There's so much variation between quality when you put the animals in there, they're getting the best stuff. And then as time goes on, the protein and the energy just slowly drops out of it. And by the end of a 2-week rotation, they're on really low quality feed. Then you jump them way back up, and the rumen is constantly trying to chase variation in energy and protein. So, but in the past, we haven't really had a choice. We were building fence ahead of the cows, and we were trying to get them, just get them onto new grass. But we're going to try something different. I think this coming winter, we're going to take it in 2 passes. The first pass, we're going to go through and just take the best stuff and probably, you could say 50% of it. And then on the second pass, we're going to come through, and depending on how much rain we get in the fall and how much stockpile is left, we might even supplement with a little bit of, I'm going to say it's a rumen stimulant. So something like corn gluten, something to feed the bacteria in the rumen just a little bit to make them a little bit more efficient on the roughage that's left for the second pass. It's something we're going to try. I've heard of a couple guys that do it, and I've talked to them, and they've had really good results. So we're going to see if that doesn't, extend our stockpile a little bit further this year, and just try it. It's 80% of our cost is keeping animals through the winter. So anything that we can do to extend our stockpile is crucial for us here, especially with no hay and stuff like that.
Right. Yes. You got your cattle going, you got your paddocks going, and at a certain point you decided to add sheep. You kind of mentioned a while ago adding them. When did you decide to add sheep, and how's that going?
We got the sheep in 2019. We actually bought 60 ewes from Greg Judy. And just to try it, I was, to be honest, pretty intimidated about keeping them in a fence and kind of didn't want to do it. And my wife said, no, we're gonna do this. And she really kept me on track there. And ended up falling in love with the sheep. I swore I would never own one. And now that I have them, I absolutely love them. We did really well lambing last year. Or I should say we did okay lambing last year. We had 60 ewes. We ended up with 60 lambs. And so it was pretty good for us and not knowing what we're doing. And then we ended up buying some more. We bought another 120 from Greg this past year. And then have just over the last couple of years seeing the economics behind the sheep and how much they're able to utilize our steep country and our invasive species. And we think they're a better fit here for us than our cattle. I think we'll always have a combination. We really enjoy the cattle. So I don't want to get rid of my cows, but I think the sheep are more productive on our ranch than the cows are. So we're gonna expand some more. We bought a semi-load of sheep from a producer out west for this fall. So we've got another 580 coming this fall. So we should be around 900 ewes by the end of the year. So we're kind of jumping in with both feet on the sheep. It's been really fun, and we really enjoyed them, and just decided that they're going to be a really good fit here. So we're gonna pursue them, and we're probably going to have to sell some of our cows to make room for that many, but we're okay doing that.
Oh yes. Now the sheep you're getting, we didn't talk about this with cattle, so we'll have to talk about it with cattle. You mentioned you got the original sheep from Greg Judy, and I think he's running Codlin and St. Croix Cross, just some commercial hair sheep that he's kind of got the breeding that he likes. What kind of sheep are you getting in from the west?
They're Dorpers.
Oh, okay.
I don't necessarily prefer Katahdins or St. Croix or Dorpers. To be honest, I can know the difference between them, but I'm not choosing Dorpers because I think they're any better. They're just what was available in a semi-load.
Oh, yes.
And I found them from a producer that's not worming them. And that was the biggest thing. I didn't want to buy them from somebody who was, drenching them all the time. So trying to find a large load like that was pretty tough. And talked to a really nice guy out there and found a cool producer. So they're different than what we have, and we're still trying to sort through what we're going to breed to in the future. Are we going to go towards the Dorpers or stay with kind of the hardier, maybe Katahdins or St. Croix?
Oh, yes.
So we're going to kind of see how it goes and see how they do first before we decide, what to breed them to.
Oh, yes.
And then we've also got the Guardian dogs in with them as well. And I was really nervous about the Guardian dogs, and they're like my favorite thing on the farm.
Oh, yes.
They're a ton of fun. Our male actually killed a coyote last year, which was really cool. I take him some meat scraps once or twice a week.
Oh, yes.
I took him it was a big leg bone, had a little bit of meat on it, and I went up to him, and he went running up in the woods and drug down this coyote that he had killed.
Oh, yes.
And like he was trying to show me what he had done, and then he wanted his meat scraps. So it was pretty neat.
Very good. They're working then. What kind of livestock guardian dogs do you have?
We have Marimas. The male that I'm referring to, I got him from Greg Judy when I got the original ewes. And since then we now have 4 dogs, and the other 3 are they're purebred Marimas, and they've been awesome as well. They just bark like crazy. We moved the sheep past our house in December, and it was a long night because they just bark and bark and bark. Yes. I never realized how much they work at night. It seems during the day they can seem kind of lazy, but man, having them outside my back door, I was impressed at how much they barked.
Oh yeah, they keep that bark going all night. It takes you a little bit to get used to it.
It does, yeah. It was a sleepless night.
We didn't talk about this with your cattle. What breed of cattle are you using?
We've got a little bit of everything. We're using South Pole bulls right now on Red Angus, Black Angus. We've got some Red Devons. We've got some Semi-Angus cows. And I'm not a guy that's huge on one breed is better than the next. I've seen some really good Angus cows, and I've seen some really, really bad Angus cows. And I can say that for about every breed that I've seen.
I would agree.
I just think the right type is way more important to me than the breed. I know South Poles are kind of, there's a lot of hype about them right now, and I think they're great cattle. I don't think they're God's gift to the cattle business. But we found a set of South Pole bulls we really, really liked. They were from Ralph Voss in central Missouri there. And I went and spent some time with Ralph and looked at his cow herd, and that's, if I could write out what my cows to look like, he had it. They were 1,000 to 1,200 pounds. They were in great shape. He wasn't feeding a lot of supplements. And they were super quiet and raising really nice calves. So we went with them. I bought in the last 2 years, have bought 15 bulls from him to breed our cows too. And I just really liked his genetics, and that's kind of the direction I wanted to go. It just happened to be South Pulls, we've done really well with them. We're not necessarily in a hot environment, so they're, the heat tolerance, it does help us here in the summertime, but it's probably not as important to us as it is to some who have South Pulls. But they're doing really well here.
Yes. Have you planted any grasses, or you just working with what's already there?
Right now, we're just working with what's here. It's kind of on the back of our agenda. I would love to try some cover crops, just to try to increase, like our water infiltration and maybe even some winter forage that would be really beneficial for us. But we just haven't had the time and the finances to really go try it, to be honest with you. So maybe that's in our future. Maybe not. It hasn't been a priority right now. So maybe someday.
One thing you talked about all these ewes you're going to have and your cow herd. How are you marketing them, or marketing the calves and lambs?
The calves, we've gone a couple different routes. We have a direct-to-consumer market here. My wife actually has a business called Farm and Table, and we have a shipping department here on the farm where we have a walk-in freezer, and we're shipping those products. We can ship them anywhere in the country. We also do some pastured pork. It's not we have our neighbors actually help us with it. I don't do a ton of it, and they're going to raise all our pigs for us this year. So we sell pork and lamb and beef online. And then my wife also, as well as that on Farm and Table, she also sells a bunch of other small businesses. Like she works with the local beekeeper and sells their honey. And she works with a local spice company, and they make us a steak seasoning and a burger seasoning and stuff like that. So there's probably 30 products that she does with other local businesses. And it all kind of comes back to our website, and we try to drive our sales through working with other local businesses.
Oh, yes. Very good. Now, is that market big enough to handle all the calves you're producing?
I wish it was. No.
Right, that'd be pretty good.
Yeah, those margins would be great. It's not. We've been selling, last couple of years, we've been selling steers to get grass-fed producers, just guys that are wanting to finish grass-fed beef. We typically just sell them by the semi-load. We'll sell semi-load of steers and a semi-load of heifers. And then we've actually been keeping a lot of our heifers as well. So we haven't sold a ton of those, just to get a little bit more of the South Pole influence here.
Oh, yes.
Ultimately, we want to sell seed stock is where we want to go. It's going to take us a little bit to get our genetics to where I want them before I want to really put my name on them and say these are my animals that I'm producing.
Oh, yes.
So our genetics aren't perfect yet, but we're working on that and trying to develop a seed stock market. And it's kind of similar for the sheep. We're direct marketing some of those, but it's pretty limited, especially with the scale we're going to be on with the ewes. Again, we want to try and sell a lot of seed stock there. But we're in a pretty good area. We've got a couple really good sale barns close to us. Mount Hope, Ohio, is one of the biggest ones in the east. And they sell usually 2,000 or 3,000 sheep a week. And they've got really, really good prices right now. And then we're not too far from a lot of the East Coast cities like Philadelphia and New York and DC. So there's a lot of buyers that come to Mount Hope and will buy semi-loads of ewes. And I've got a couple of those contacts. And instead of going through the sale barn, I'm kind of just going straight to those guys once we have our scale established.
Oh, yeah.
So it's going to be wholesale, which I'm not a huge fan of, but at some point you kind of have to when you scale up pretty high.
Right. You can't, or I really shouldn't say you can't. It's difficult to sell at retail level everything you're producing.
It is.
Especially if you're growing at the rate you're growing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's been a struggle for us, is trying to balance our time with the retail business, and then just the family and the amount of work we have here. And we're just trying to figure the marketing out. I never would have realized, or I never would have dreamed that the marketing is harder for us than the production. It's way more of it's a way bigger part of our business than I thought it would be.
Oh,
I never
yes.
realized that, just being in construction, you just keep your head down and working. And then, when you get into running your own business, it's like the fun part's the production. It's the lambing and the calving and moving cows. But
Right. Yes, it
the
is.
important part has to follow with the marketing too. All that doesn't do you very good if you can't sell it. That was a big shocker for us, was that how difficult the marketing and how important the marketing was.
So you mentioned the marketing there. What other challenges have you faced upon your farm?
I think marketing is probably one of the biggest ones. And then just in the past, when we're dealing with the up and down in the markets, like when we're selling semi-loads of calves, I got into the cattle business in 2014, and 2015 and 16 were great. And then everything kind of fell down after that. And just learning that there could be that much variation in your income from year to year, it was frustrating because you were working so hard, but you took a 40% pay cut from 2015 to 2017, and it just didn't seem like it was worth it at times. And it's been really hard, and that's why we're focusing so much on the other kinds of marketing, like the seed stock and the direct to consumer, because you can control those, and they're a lot more stable than the wholesale outlets. So that's probably been the biggest challenge. The production has its challenges as well. I mean, the water is it's everything. I wish we had water systems everywhere and we could move cows all over the place, but we'll get there someday. We just got to take it slow and build it from the ground up.
Very good. And as you keep working on those challenges, as you get better with those, new ones will show up. So there's always challenges.
Oh, I'm sure there will be. Yeah. The 18-month-old kid, he was a challenge as well, and still is. He's a joy, but raising kids and trying to make time for them and the wife, that's also been a big challenge. But it's super important. So that one has to take priority.
It does. You have to have that balance. You have to have time for family.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the ewes you're getting this fall, and maybe decreasing your cattle numbers to allow you to run more sheep. Along with that, what do you see for the future of your farm?
Right now, we're okay with being a farm that's 100% leased ground. It's working well. We've got a large enough land base in the area that we kind of have the idea of bringing our sheep numbers up to maybe 2/3 of our capacity, and maybe the cattle being at 1/3. But being in the leased business, you're always worried about, well, what if they sell this ground, or what if I lose my lease? So I think right now we're just going to expand as much as we can on this leased ground, and then as we can afford it and as we get time and money, try to start buying some of this ground. It'll be years away. We've got a long way to go before we're at that point, but I would love to be able to own a piece of this ground someday and have something that I can hand down to my son if he wants to take over the farm. That would be basically my dream. So that's kind of the way long-term future. But yeah, just trying to balance in the sheep and the cattle thing, and then balancing, the family and the workload. I want to have a future that's enjoyable and not just work. So we've got a lot of figuring out to do there, but the sheep, I think, are going to be a big part of our future, and we're really enjoying them. So the sheep and the dogs are, like I said, a ton of fun. So
very good. Very good. Austin, we've reached the point in our podcast for our overgrazing section. It's where we take a deep dive into one of your practices. What are we going to take a deep dive into today?
Well, I kept thinking about this question, and everything that I thought of came down to was just what a low input farmer or a low input business actually means for us. So that's where I would like to go, if that's all right with you.
That sounds like a great topic.
Okay, well, in January, I went to the Ranching for Profit school and kind of learned I learned a ton there. It was an awesome school, but I broke this section down into 3 categories, and they kind of explain this there as your business is a 3-legged pot, and the 3 legs are land, production, and money. I kind of took this into the low input version for those three. And for us,
yes,
the low input in regards to the land was just it was just leasing it versus buying it. I always, when I was little, my dad used to say, Austin, if there's any way you can be a farmer or a rancher and make a living, do it. And I think growing up, I had this idea that I had to buy this ground and I had to put cows on it and make those cows make payments on the land and provide for my family. And working for these two other ranches just totally opened my eyes to the opportunity of leasing ground, and you don't have to buy it to still have the same lifestyle. So for us, the low input means leasing it versus buying it. And then production wise, I think there's a lot of people that overbuild their fences, and it all depends on it's different for everybody. But for us, we can get away with some pretty low input fences. Like I said, we're keeping sheep with one wire as perimeter fence right now in certain areas. And I did the math here, and when we use fiberglass posts, we can build perimeter fence. If it's one strand, it's 9 cents a foot, and if it's two strands, which would keep our cows and our sheep probably a little better than a single strand, it's only 15 cents a foot. And I think there's a lot of people, and it depends on how you're managing and stuff like that, but I think there's a lot of overbuilt fences in this area. And I remember one time I had Ian Mitchell Innes come out here, and he helped me kind of set some stuff up, and just drove him around and he took a look at the place here, and he said something and I'll never forget. He said, "Use your head, not your pocketbook." And it's just a simple saying, but that has stuck with me through so much. And to me, that's our fences. We just, we build it and we try it and we keep it low cost. And if it doesn't work, then we can improve it. So that's kind of where we came in, from the low input point of view from our production. And as far as livestock goes, something that I struggled with and I wish I could do over now was I had this idea that I had to go save up money and buy these cows or get a loan for them. And there's a ton of opportunity here for custom grazing. And I wish I would have known that earlier, because you don't have to have a ton of capital. You can use other people's money and run stocker calves, or even run cow-calf pairs for other people and let them pay for them. And you can still be a low-input producer who doesn't have a lot of money, especially getting started. And I wish I had figured that out sooner, because it would have been a lot easier for us versus taking out loans and making interest payments and stuff like that. So that's kind of just my point of view as far as for overgrazing. I low input to us means it's basically our entire operation. It's more than just not having a piece of equipment. It's a mindset and everything we do, from equipment to our fences to how much money we have to tie up into working capital. We just try to be smart and stay as low input as we possibly can.
I think you make some excellent points there. And just to add to what you were saying there, custom grazing was not something I had ever thought about. And while I've never done it, reading Greg Judy's book, I don't know if it's talked about in both of them, No Risk Ranching, I think it's the last one I read. Yeah. And it talks about it. And before I had read that book, that had never crossed my mind.
Yeah, me too.
That way, with leased land, even if you don't have anything, if you've got the motivation and drive to get out there and find leased land, and like you said, it took you a number of years. For me here, I'm running cattle and sheep with my dad. Finding leased land for my own took way longer than I ever expected it to. In fact, I'm in a constant hunt for more leased land. But you just got to get out there and get started.
Yeah, that's right. My wife always just says, you just need a little bit of work ethic and it'll go a long way. You can find the rest of it out there and just go and do it and put yourself out there, and opportunity will find you.
Yes. Yeah. You create those opportunities for the opportunities.
Exactly.
Austin, I really like that deep dive into low inputs and our earlier conversation on low inputs. Let's go ahead and move on to our famous 4. They're the same 4 questions we ask of all of our guests. I don't know if we'll ever get tired of these questions. I don't. I enjoy them. But our first question, what's your favorite grazing grass related book or resource?
For me, that would be the book. It's called The Turnaround by Dave Pratt. It's if you go to the Ranching for Profit school, they send it to you before you go, and you're supposed to read it before you go to the school. And just the way that book explains the economics and the business side of the grazing world and the cattle or the ranching industry was extremely eye-opening to me, and I would highly recommend it if anybody out there has not read it.
I always love it on these books. I'm an avid reader, and I'm an avid book buyer. That's a big problem I have. But this book, I didn't know about it. I'm going to have to get this book.
It's phenomenal. It's one of my favorites. I burned out a couple highlighters going through it, and all the pages are ear tagged, and yeah, there's a lot of good information in it.
Well, Amazon's made this too easy. I want to support my local booksellers, but I often, I've already got it in my car.
Oh, there you go. I love it.
Our second question, what tool could you not live without on your farm?
For me, as soon as I read this question, I said it's onX Maps on my computer. For trying to find leased ground and track down landowners and draw fences and estimate how many feet of fence you need, there's not a day that goes by I'm not on onX looking at something. It's from planning water lines, and you can estimate how many feet of pipe you need and where you want your water troughs, and you can look at topo maps. I can't explain to you how valuable onX is for our operation. I'm probably the most used client out there. I'm on it all the time.
I don't know. I'm surprised. We hadn't talked about this before, and it kind of surprises me you say that. I use onX all the time because I'm all the time driving by land. I'm like, oh, wait. That's a potential land for lease.
I do the same thing. I got to pull over off the road sometimes because I shouldn't be looking at it while I'm driving. I'm trying to get cell phone service and track the landowner down. And every time I drive by a farm, I pull up my onX. Who owns that?
Right. Yeah. Right. My wife gets on to me at times because really again.
Right. Me too.
Hey.
I get punched in the shoulder sometimes. Keep your eyes on the road.
Oh, yeah. Our third question. What would you tell someone just getting started on this journey?
The thing I wish I had done, or somebody would have told me, was I wish I would have gone to that Ranching for Profit school before I went on my own. Our operation would look a lot different than it does now.
Oh, yes.
The school is really, really powerful, and I'm not getting paid by them, I promise. I'm just a big fan. And then after the school, they have a program called Executive Link, and it's an awesome program. I just joined it and had a meeting with a bunch of different ranchers for it. And it's the networking you meet there and the connections you make. It's absolutely crucial for setting up an operation. Even if you're just starting out and you don't have a bunch of stuff, I would still go to the school before you really dive in, and you can learn the business and the economics and how to do gross margins and stuff like that. Before you start, it would have saved me a ton of money if I had done this stuff.
Oh, yes.
When I first got into this versus doing it, 3 years in on my own. That would have been awesome if I could redo that.
Oh, very good. And lastly, Austin, where can others find out more about you?
I'm not big on social media. If that was up to me, I wouldn't have one. But just because of the marketing you can do on there, we do have an Instagram. It's Crossroads Land and Livestock. Just one word. And then we also have a website. It's crossroadslandandlivestock.com. And we have quite a bit of information on there. My phone number and my email is on there as well.
Very good, Austin. We'll make sure we have those links in our show notes. We appreciate you coming on to the podcast and sharing about your journey and what you're doing there at Crossroads. Really enjoyed it.
I appreciate you having me on. It's been a pleasure, and I thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with Austin. I think he brought up lots of valid points, and he is a big fan of the Ranching for Profit School. As always, thank you for listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers. Be sure to share this episode, leave us a review, and subscribe. Hey there, listeners. We appreciate you tuning in and want to continue bringing you the best content we can. But producing a podcast takes a lot of time and effort, so we need your support. You can help us out by joining the Grazing Grass community and becoming a supporter for exclusive content and early releases. Also, you can buy our merch to show your love for the show or by using our affiliate links to purchase products or services we recommend. If you can't support us financially, please spread the word and tell others about our show. Thank you for your support, and we can't wait to bring you more great conversations from grass farmers like you.